Once upon a time, one day in the Ming dynasty, someone was seen relinquishing the crown of leadership. He was the great general Li Guo. The general began to remove all his armor. He walked past the soldiers who were lined up at the side. All the soldiers began to call for a final salute to their great general. But suddenly, someone ran up with a message from the emperor. A special message that had to be delivered to Major General Li Guo. The Major General turned around and sat down, preparing to listen to orders from the emperor. Our teacher, brother in arms in the war. He raised millions of great troops. Great General Li Guo must listen to this. If we are the rulers of the Ming dynasty, then the great general is the sword. It is thanks to you that we live. And it's because of you that the Ming dynasty is successful. It's a pity that there won't be someone as loyal as you in the future. Because the great general should have been appointed as an imperial advisor and given power. However, when you decided to relinquish your leadership by resigning, we cannot accept it. We hereby order you to always be the sword of the Ming dynasty. Even if your body, Li Gao, is decrepit, it will not change the fact that you are forever our brother and teacher. After the letter was read, the great general stood up. He then turned around and walked away from the Ming dynasty. Everyone called out his name and asked him not to leave. But the great general's mind was made up. He had reached the pinnacle of martial arts. He had reached the absolute level in his old age. And thanks to what he had achieved, all the gray hairs on his face began to fade. He returned to youth where his glory and power were limitless. After that, the general was reportedly not seen for several years. It is said that there are 4 powerful people in Murim. First is the dark soul of the blood demon god. Then there is the infinity of the king of Murim, the bone collector of the Bayak clan. And there is a man who carries a sword, the unbending. He has the appearance of a nobleman who is more than 20 years old. He really looked like he had never used a sword. He was a man who identified himself as Li Guil. The man came to a swordmaker and asked for 30 swords to be forged with holes in the body. Then, there was an old man forging a sword. He explained that the unbending, the colors of gold and purple flowed through the body of the sword in harmony. A sword that shone like a meteor fell in the sky. That legend once said, the sharpness that has not changed for 1,000 years is incomparable. The legend of the unbending continues to be passed down. But suddenly, the grandfather threw the sword he was forging while cursing. His son tried to stop him, but the grandfather immediately approached a blue-haired man who was Li Guil, who the grandfather did not know that the man was Li Guil. The grandfather was angry with him, and called him stupid, and thought that a sword was just an ordinary piece of iron. Grandpa explained that a sword is a tool that saves mankind and also something that can kill them too. But, how dare the blue-haired man do such a thing as perforating the best sword in the world, and said something trivial to the owner of the sword. However, Li Guil just looked at him casually and did not respond. He immediately took out a bag and tried to open it. According to the grandfather, even if the man gave him a bag of gold, he would not dare to perforate the sword used by the hero. But suddenly, he was so surprised when he saw the contents, which was an iron meteorite. Of course, the grandfather asked questions about where the man could find such a valuable iron. Li Guil explained to him that if it wasn't for Chul Wang, then he probably wouldn't have made the request to the grandfather. The grandfather said in his mind, actually, with this much meteorite iron, he could make a sword that wouldn't break, even if there was a hole in the body of the sword. He was even more curious, who exactly was this bastard? The grandfather continued forging the sword. Then, Li Guil came out and the grandfather followed him. The grandfather felt that the blue-haired man reminded him of someone. Then, the grandfather gave him the first sword he forged from meteorite iron. The grandfather seemed to be curious, so he asked him, why did the man want to make 30 hollow swords using meteorite iron that costs more than gold? Li Guil told him that all the swords were for gifts, but he couldn't tell him. The old man looked down and kept looking back at Li Guil. Then, he resumed forging his sword. While forging the sword, he spoke in his mind that the old man didn't need to see the man many times. The blue-haired man seemed to look similar to someone when the man was young. He also told him that when the old man was 20 years old, he couldn't hold back his youth and ran to the battlefield. Stabbing and stabbing people was his specialty. He had thought that in this world no one can stop him in the excitement of this war. But suddenly, a man was seen riding a horse and carrying a spear. The man immediately threw the spear at one of the soldiers who was the grandfather when he was young. He was already resigned when he saw a spear sliding quickly towards his face. But suddenly, there was a hand that stopped the spear so that it did not hit the grandfather's face. The hand with one squeeze can destroy the spear. His figure was seen, which turned out to be a general named Li Guil. And the grandfather felt, revealed already, that the name of the man with blue hair, his name was very similar to the figure of the general who saved him. After the rest time arrived, the grandfather was seen drinking with Li Guil. Grandpa told him that when he was in the military, he heard a story while moving between many battlefields. It was a story about a great disciple of a certain clan, who was the oldest disciple in the clan. One day, the clan master called him and suddenly asked him to join the war in place of another disciple. It was as if lightning struck from a clear sky. But the great disciple was no ordinary man. He treated the other disciples like his own siblings and said that he would gladly do it. Then he went to war. When the great disciple reached the battlefield, he survived repeatedly from the many battlefields. Because he was waiting for the day when he could return to his clan. Even if he wanted to die, he couldn't do it. But one day, lightning struck him again. He found the reason why the clan master sent the great disciple to war. It turned out, the clan master wanted to hand over the clan to his son and expel the great disciple who was better than his son. Since then, during the war there was a hole in his heart and he did not open his mouth for days. Actually, the grandfather was very curious whether this blue-haired man was the great disciple, because the great disciple's name was Li Guil. But the grandfather suddenly patted his head and thought it didn't make sense, because even if it was true, Li Guil, if he was still alive, would be 90 years old. But he also didn't know why talk about this story with a 20-year-old boy. Then apparently, the grandfather had a hunch that the blue-haired man recognized Li Guil, so he said that he wanted to repay his kindness if he could meet General Li Guil someday. After that, the grandfather asked permission to leave and told him that the final sword would be completed tomorrow. Now Li Guil was alone. He looked down and pondered. Then he raised his hand and saw a wound on his hand. He now realized that this wound did not disappear because Chul Wang still could not forget it. Apparently, this blue-haired man was the figure of General Li Guil. No matter how he became young, whether it was regression or reincarnation, has not been told further. In short, the last sword was finished, and the grandfather showed the sword to him. Li Guil also took the sword and thought it was very good and comfortable. Then, the old man looked down at him and wanted to ask him a question. That all this time, he had been thinking while he was working, and he wanted to know the reason why Li Guil wanted to perforate the sword. The old man asked him to share his wisdom, so as to expand the old man's knowledge. Then, Li Guil smiled and invited him to go out. A flashback shows that when Li Guil couldn't return to his clan, his heart was very empty, even though the incident had long passed. However, at the same time there was a man who he promised to repay with his whole life. In sight, there was a man named Gong Bek Bek. He who was just an ordinary student, gave a cloth that was the logo of their army and gave it to Li Guil, who was already a general. Back to Li Guil and Ko Leung, who are now in the forest. Apparently, Li Guil is getting ready to make a move to show him. But the grandfather seems to have a lot of questions in his mind. According to the legend of the unbending story, a third-rate person can face a first-rate person if he uses the unbending. But why does the blue-haired man want to perforate the sword? Li Guil immediately poured his chakra into the sword, and there was a firelight chakra surrounding the sword. Then, Li Guil swung the sword very casually, but it was very beautiful to look at. Even though the distance between his stand and the tree was a bit far, but because his chakra coverage was so strong, he was able to slash the tree without hitting it. Seeing that, of course the grandfather was very surprised. He did not expect that the 18 holes on the sword were used to explode the inner power. He was impressed, because to release that much power was only used with one half-circle swing. He wondered, what if the power was released in one full circle swing? Then, the grandfather also asked permission to give a name to the sword. Li Guil generously agreed. The grandfather firmly told him that the sword would be named Hollow Thunder, which means the hole of lightning. Because according to him, it was better than calling it the Heavenly Dragon Sword or the Invincible Blade. Apparently, Li Guil agreed with the name and he immediately took the box containing 30 swords and was about to leave. Of course the grandfather became curious. He also asked him where he was going. Li Guil also turned to him and immediately remembered his memories at that time with Gong Bek Bek, which was like deja vu. This incident was similar to that time. Li Guil immediately went to him and gave him a cloth. grasped the grandfather's hand tightly, and Li Guol also told him, to be able to release the burden on his heart, do not feel burdened, Gong Bek. After saying that, Li Guol immediately rushed away. Hearing that, the grandfather's tears immediately fell heavily. He did not expect that anyone still remembered his real name. For a moment, he looked at Li Guol, who began to walk away from him. He now understood that it was the figure of General Li Guol. Instantly, he immediately saluted, kowtowing as a sign of gratitude for being able to meet him again, even though human logic does not make sense. In short, Li Guol has now arrived at 1,000 Sword Academy Cemetery in Xian Mountain. He also greeted the grave of his friend named Zhang Peng, who was the 20th student of 1,000 Sword Academy, and he became the Sword of Heaven in the Qianyang War. Li Guol also stabbed a sword into his grave and asked him to forgive him. After that, Li Guol put the sword into the ground. After that, he went around the tomb and poured a cup of drink to the tomb. It turned out, the tomb was the last residence of the academy students who died in the Qianyang War. The war that took 15 of the 30 students. He also asked, while looking at the sky, what happened to this world when he disappeared. In short, 6 years later, in the western part of Taihu Jiangsu, on the coast of Huaishan, there were inns and brothels. There were many places to enjoy as long as one had enough money. However, there was only one tea house, a tea house called Muju Tea House, where customers chose their own cups, teapots, and tea leaves. While they were making their own tea, at Muju Tea House, the price of the tea would only be determined when someone bought it. Then, there was a beautiful woman named Un So Liang. She looked around, and according to her, this place is not like what people rumored. Because based on rumors, it is said that more than 100 women are eyeing the owner of the Muju Tea House. She recounted that earlier, the Murim Alliance was called to a big conference for the first time in 15 years, and now they sent a message to the woman's clan, the House of Fair's Mothers. The chairman of the House of Fair's Mothers told Un So Liang to attend the alliance meeting. He felt, being the representative of his clan, he had a great responsibility and would teach a lesson to the owner of this shop that often made the women uneasy. In short, until the evening, the woman was still in the shop. And soon, the figure of the shop owner appeared, who turned out to be Li Guol. Just now the woman looked at Li Guol. The woman was immediately amazed by his very handsome look, rich women. And now she was sure why the women were so willing to chase after this man. She also begged in her heart so that this man could flirt with her. Li Guol immediately approached her and told her that this shop will be closed. Of course, in that dreamy state she was very surprised, because suddenly charged for payment. Not according to his expectations, that will be teased. He immediately rushed to look in his pocket. What was his surprise, when he opened his pocket, that he forgot to bring money because he was too in a hurry. And he thought this was very embarrassing, had mistaken people and accused that the man who liked to play with women, and now, he could not pay for his tea. The woman immediately turned to Li Guol while saying sorry, and immediately ran to escape. Li Guol also looked at her while scratching his head. He did not expect that there was someone who dared not pay at his place, but he smiled. It seems that he also did not care about it. Told 6 years ago, after giving the scriptures and hollow thunder to the clan, Li Guol finally met the old priest of the Jiuhua Mountain Temple, Tea Master Gongya. There, Li Guol learned the pulse art to control his body and mind by drinking tea, called the art of spreading tea. Muju Tea House is a place built to spread his teachings throughout the world. Also, this tea house became an easy place of discussion about the world, through the talk of customers. And sure enough, customers gossiped about a girl named Gong Zhonggum from Thousand Sword Academy, dubbed as the most beautiful woman in the whole Jiangbei. Yes, she is beautiful. Even at the age of 16, she won the martial arts competition. And now, she is in her 20s looking like a blooming flower. And not only that, she said, it was Gong Zhonggum who chased and captured the shadow body killer who made a mess in Shaanxi. However, when Li Guol was about to leave, he saw a letter on the floor, which turned out, it was a letter from the Murim Association to the chairman of the House of Fairs. He didn't expect that the woman was the vice chairman of a mysterious sect whose only members were women. When Li Guol opened the letter, he was shocked to see the contents, which read, due to important changes in the blood demonic heavens, we are here to strengthen ties with the Murim Union. So, we expected many participants from Zhongyuan and Luoyang. Apparently, Li Guol is curious about this event. Meanwhile, at the Hanjin Financial Institution, the residence built by Yeo Sangyil, a high-ranking official of the Golden Authority, as well as the richest man in all of China. The figure of the golden government official named Yeo Sangyil was seen. He was reading a book. Suddenly, Li Guol appeared there, which of course surprised him. Without much ado, Li Guol immediately said firmly to him that he wanted to know the quiet information of the chaos that occurred in the Blood Demon clan. As it turns out, the chairman already recognized Li Guol. He also often felt anxious when Li Guol faced him, because it was like an assassin who would kill him. The chairman got up and told him about the Blood Demon, but before that, he told him that some time ago, there were some thieves who dared to take his money. They entered by jumping over the wall behind. He explained that this incident has something to do with the question that was asked. The chairman asked about the wordless sword. Hearing that, Li Guol was a little jolted. He knows about Dokbai, who was a one-handed assassin. Then he explained, Dokbai, the wordless sword. 40 years ago he was known as a polite and virtuous person. However, ever since he lost his arm, he started killing, stealing, even raping, and became an enemy of the Miram world. After stealing money from the Hanjin financial institution, he even raped 8 women in the capital. He killed 6 of them, and the other 2 went crazy and couldn't even speak anymore. Then, he also attacked a bar in the capital and left 23 people dead. The elder continued that there were many rumors as to why he came out of hiding. But he felt that it had something to do with the Blood Demon clan's recent movements. After getting that information, Li Guol went out and looked at the bright moon. He said in his mind that actually, as a soldier who practiced martial arts, he really wanted to punish Dokbai. But he realized that all affairs in this world are not essentially formed from good deeds alone. According to him, in order to create good deeds there needs to be a reward. And the criminals will definitely try to stop that. And in the process of breaking this dark chain is not easy. Then, he wondered, what was the difference with the place in Muram that he lived in, just as cruel, because just for a place to live he had to pay for a place that was not even enough with 1,000 gold coins. Suddenly, Li Guol surprised himself in a strange place. When he looked back, there was a creature that told him to leave. Li Guol thought that it was his master. It turned out, it was a creature who knew nothing. The creature told Li Guol to leave, so that Thousand Sword Academy could survive. Then, there was a flashback when Li Guol was ferocious on the battlefield. But suddenly, his eyes opened and it was just a dream. A few days later, when Li Guol was serving himself tea, suddenly a monk appeared in front of him. It was Monk Gongya. Monk Gongya paused for a moment and then told her to remember one thing. He had witnessed an important figure in the future through his sky ocular passage. There was a young man wearing a red cape as if it was filled with blood. And he could only hope that it was not Li Guol in the future. After saying that, the monk immediately disappeared. Li Guol immediately looked down and said in his mind to tell his master not to worry, because he had promised himself not to return to the warlike and murderous past. In short, a few days had passed. It was the night of the full moon during the fall festival. Everyone who visited the Muja's shop made a wish to the full moon. They were looking at the same moon. But they wished for different things. Some wish for health. Some wish for good fortune. There are even those who wish for eternal love. As for Li Guol, he hopes that the success of Thousand Swords will last for a long time. Here we see Li Guol who really cares and loves Thousand Sword College. But suddenly, Li Guol's view was distracted. He smelled blood from several men who had just entered his shop. Seeing the 3 men sitting right in the middle of the room. After sitting down, the long-haired man revealed that he had already blocked all incoming sounds with his power, so now they could talk as they pleased. The long-haired man gave them advice to find a hiding place first. As it turns out, this long-haired man is Dokbai, the wordless sword. Someone suggested they move to Hainan Shang and live quietly there. But Sibatak gave his opinion that Hainan was not a safe place. If they were seen by the head of the House of Fair Mothers, then the group would try to arrest Mr. Dokbai. That person again suggested to go to Shangxi, because it could be profitable if they moved there. He explained, because the Blood Demon clan and the Muram Union are always at war in Shangxi, so things are always chaotic there. Besides, it's the perfect place to avoid being watched by the authorities. And one more thing, there's the most beautiful woman in all of Jiangbei named Shiraiche, from the Hollowing Thundersword sect. If they move there, they have a chance to taste that beautiful girl. But Li Guol is not an ordinary person. He could hear the 3 chatting, even though Dokbai had blocked the sound with his power. Li Guol stood back while pretending to light the coals. The bald man also explained that they could not go to Shanxi either. Of course, the man who suggested it became annoyed, because his proposals were always rejected. Of course, Dokbai also became curious and wanted to know why the bald man forbade them there. The bald man then explained about the events that had occurred in Shanxi. That there is a problem with the Hollowing Thundersword sect, or better known as the Thousand Sword College. The Thousand Sword College really wants to hunt down the person who has disrupted the city of Shangxi, namely the Shadow Body Killer. But the Shadow Body Killer asked the Blood Demon Clan for help when he escaped from prison. And strangely, the Blood Demon Clan is willing to help the Shadow Body Killer. The first reason is because the Blood Demon wants to create chaos in Shangxi by utilizing the dispute between the Shadow Body Killer and the Thousand Sword College. And the second reason is that the Blood Demon Clan wants to target the Thousand Sword College's divine artifact, the 15 Hollow Thunder Swords. Because it was rumored that the sword even had a level that almost equaled 4 Murim God swords. Hearing that, the man who suggested the place was very happy. He thought it was great that the Blood Demon Clan was more interested in weapons than women. So he was eager to go there, so he could use the women there. But the bald man held back his perverted face. As it turned out, today the bald man also received information that the Blackstrom cavalry of the Blood Demon Clan had been mobilized to attack the Thousand Sword College. That's the reason why they can't go to Shangxi. Hearing the news, Li Guo was naturally furious. He couldn't let the Thousand Sword College be attacked by the enemy. Suddenly, Li Guo approached them and asked them about the truth of the attack information. Of course, it surprised Dokbai and his two friends. Dokbai then looked back. She was still surprised that Li Guo could hear the conversation despite his power. Li Guo looked at them sharply and asked again about the news. One of Dokbai's friends whose face is perverted feels threatened. He then jumps up and attacks Li Guo. He starts to attack blindly with his Unity of 5 Divine Sword technique. But Li Guo casually throws a red object that is charcoal. The man easily cut it open. But to his surprise, the red object did not stop moving. It then hit the man in the eye until he was knocked out and spun far back. The bald man who watched couldn't believe it, that he thought it was impossible. Because Yang's move just now was a Realm of Emptiness move. The bald man also couldn't believe that his friend could die just from a light attack using charcoal. Then, Li Guo reiterated asking about the information. The baldy who felt the killing air of Li Guo then prostrated and asked for forgiveness. And explained to him that he had heard the news a month ago. But from behind, suddenly came a hand. And it turned out to be the hand of Dokbai, who then grabbed his head and bloomed it with his strength. Dokbai's power was so great that it created a powerful gust of wind in the room. Dokbai began to change. His body was enveloped by a great power after he absorbed the life energy from the bald man. And also visible. Dokbai's hand that was stumped. It grew back but shaped like a monster's hand. Then, he asked Li Guo about which demonic vessel Li Guo followed. But Li Guo did not know anything, which was meant by him. Dokbai told him not to pretend. He then explained that the demonic vessel is a combination of sects that have influence and follow the blood demonic heaven. And it was one of the demonic vessel sects that cut off Dokbai's hand. Seeing Li Guo's great ability, Dokbai thought that Li Guo came from one of the demonic vessels. And finally, it was time to avenge the loss of his right hand. Wordlessly, Li Guo raised his hand. From the roof appeared a light. And a few seconds later a sword came out of it. When he saw the sword, Li Guo became surprised, because he knew that the sword was the Hollow Thunder that he had been after all this time. He did not know that the Hollow Thunder sword was made by Li Guo. A little information, actually it is the Unbanding, yes. Just because the Hollow Thunder is very famous. And people never saw the original form of the Unbanding. So yes, they think the Unbanding is Hollow Thunder. Including this by Doc. The Unbanding began to glow in front of Li Guo. Li Guo holds it. And a dragon-shaped aura of power appears around Li Guo's body. Dokbai didn't expect Li Guo to have that much power at such a young age. He didn't expect that in front of him was the Master of Rejuvenation, a legend of the Thousand Sword School. The great General Li Guo, who has reached the peak of his power and regained his youth. Flames began to emerge from the whole of the Hollow Thunder sword. Li Guo pointed his sword forward and a huge red firepower appeared. The energy is ready to devour anyone in front of it. Dokbai, who knew that she would not be able to escape the attack, could only surrender. He then smiled and said that he wanted to see what would happen to Blood Demonic Heaven if it dared to mess with Hollow Thunder. Because he already felt how horrible it was. A few seconds later, Li Guo's attack hit Dokbai's body with great force. So fast that there was no screaming sound at all. And finally, Dokbai, the wordless sword, died at the hands of Li Guo without a fight. But not only did it kill Dokbai, Li Guo's attack also flattened the Muju tea house to the ground. What a powerful attack! Li Guo then said in his mind that he would immediately head to the academy, and told his students to hold on. Li Guo then decided to immediately head to Thousand Sword Academy to save his students. Because from the news he heard, the Thousand Sword Academy is being targeted by the Blackstrom cavalry of the Blood Demon clan. Then shown the night atmosphere in the Shangxi Kora, which looks deserted without a single resident there. Even some buildings, including the gate of the Thousand Sword Academy, have been destroyed. It was also seen that Li Guo had arrived and stood in front of the academy building, which turned out to be deserted without a single occupant. Everything was a mess, and it was clear that there had been a fight in this place some time ago. He wondered, was he too late? But he didn't feel any blood aura around him. Li Guo then released a huge aura of power. He intended to use the spreading tea technique to find out what had happened in the past. In Li Guo's shadow, several people on horseback and carrying spears were running around. The horsemen then split up and ravaged the Thousand Sword Academy. He thought that it was the Black Storm Cavalry, but he thought there was something strange. It was in Li Guo's shadow. He didn't see any of his students or the residents of the Thousand Sword Academy there at all. There is a possibility the students have managed to escape in advance. But Li Guo still felt confused and could not conclude what had happened. A few minutes later came a messenger pigeon that approached Li Guo. Li Guo immediately opened the letter, which turned out to be from Han Jin, the owner of the financial institution who always provides information to Li Guo. In the letter he wrote that right before the Blackstrom cavalry attacked, the Thousand Sword Academy received a warning and finally managed to save themselves. And they escaped in a group. After reading the letter, Li Guo stood for a moment and thought of another way to save his students. And because he didn't have much time, he immediately jumped and moved quickly to a place. Then, the scene moved to the human gate. It divides the region from the desert. This gate also separates the center and the outside of the empire, which is filled with primitives and enemy troops. At the border guard office, a soldier approaches the general. The soldier informed him that someone was trying to break through the barrier. The general then asked him to report the incident. The soldier then told him that he was a young man about 20 years old. But he came on a cavalry horse. And it was the best horse for riding through the desert. He seemed to have knowledge and experience in the military. The general then decided to come out of his room and approached Li Guo. Li Guo saw the general and greeted him, knowing that it was Kwok Chung, who helped the Heavenly Assistant clan in Shangxi 30 years ago. General Kwok Chung was naturally surprised to hear Li Guo's words. Of course, the general was wondering who this person was. Li Guo then looked up. He then said in a deep voice to Kwok Chung, "Do you know about the imperial advisor Li Guo?" Kwok Chung was even more surprised. He wondered if this was the unbending ruler, but it was impossible. But from his gaze and authority, it was very similar. Li Guo then reached into his pocket and pulled out an object which was then thrown at Kwok Chung. Kwok Chung caught the small object that looked like a charter. Kwok Chung fell silent as if he knew something. A soldier ran up to Kwok Chung to see if the general was okay. Instantly, Kwok Chung ordered the soldiers to open the gate, which of course shocked the soldiers. The soldiers were against it, because they knew we couldn't let anyone through without an order from the emperor. The general explained to them that the man was the emperor's only teacher, and told the soldiers to tell the capital that he was the imperial advisor, Major General Li Guo. The general yelled at his soldiers to open the gate immediately, which made all the soldiers panic. After the gate was opened, Li Guo spurred his horse at high speed. Before this he thought that he didn't know where the disciples were hiding. And it was also impossible to save them all at the same time. But Li Guo had other plans. He would go straight to the enemy base and threaten a little. But his main goal was to negotiate with the Blood Demon clan leader. And Li Guo continues to spur his horse. He must be able to complete his mission this time before the Blackstrom cavalry really finds the hiding place of the Thousand Sword Academy students. In short, right at the main gate of the Blood Demonic Heaven clan, there were two soldiers who were guarding there. One of the soldiers said that he saw a bird flying in the desert. But his friend didn't believe that a bird could live in such an icy desert. And sure enough, something seemed to be flying in the sky at high speed. But it wasn't a bird. It was the great General Li Guo, who jumped up and prepared to meet the enemy in front of him. His gaze was so sharp, he prepared to swing the hollow thunder in his hand with all his strength. The soldiers on guard panicked. But before they could dodge, Li Guo's heavy blow hit them all. The impact caused a loud explosion. Li Guol with his hollow thunder began to emit an aura of extraordinary power. He was seen standing among the bodies of the soldiers. And the attack was so loud that it could cause a hole in the ground around where he was standing. The other soldiers who heard the commotion came out and approached Li Guol. Among them was a large man carrying a double-sight-shaped weapon. The man praised Li Guol's ability. And he also never thought there was someone who dared to attack the Blood Demon clan directly. The man asked, "Is Li Guol from the Murim Union?" The enemy soldiers began to surround Li. Casually, Li Guol faced them and asked them, why are they disturbing the Thousand Sword College? But instead of answering, the big man teased him by asking, is there a clan with the name Thousand Sword? Of course, those words made Li Guol even angrier. Li Guol brandished his sword and emphasized to them to remember the incident of the Blood Demon attacking the Thousand Sword clan from Shaanxi, which was attacked by the Blackstrom cavalry near the river. Hearing that, the big man smiled, now that he remembered it. According to him, they were a bunch of weaklings who dared to possess the Hollow Thunder artifact, and they had hunted them like a lion hunts a rabbit. Of course, Li Guol was running out of patience. He also thought of finishing them all off, as arguing would only waste his time. The big man came forward and attacked Li Guol, followed by the Blood Demon clan warriors behind him. Li Guol shouted, which released a blue flame aura around his body. Just a few seconds later, a light shone so brightly from the Hollow Thunder sword that all the soldiers could not see and could not withstand the energy of Li Guol. And after the attack was over, Li Guol began to walk forward, leaving dozens of dead bodies of soldiers and including the lifeless big man behind him. Just walked a few steps, several people returned to block Li Guol. Li Guol told them to call the demon blood leader immediately. However, the bald man, who turned out to be one of the 12 demonic vessels named Sura Magan, told Li Guol that there is no such thing as a leader here, because there is only one demon god that we honor. He also emphasized that the demon god is not someone who can be met at will. According to him, if you want to meet the demon god, Li Guol must first defeat him and 12 other demonic vessels, and also defeat their 10,000 followers. After that, Li Guol might be able to meet the demon god. Without another word, Li Guol immediately unleashed his power aura. In his opinion, this was by far the furthest. He then jumps and prepares to draw his Hollow Thunder sword. Without having time to fight back, Li Guol manages to slash Sura Magan at high speed until he falls down and dies instantly. All the warriors following Sura Magan began to worry. Even one of the demonic vessels can be defeated by Li Guol with one move. Li Guol then looked at them horribly and spoke to them that he would force the demon god to appear. Suddenly a big, bald man carrying a big sword appeared. It turned out that he was also one of the 12 demonic vessels named Sohan. According to him, the reputation of the 5 sex protectors has been tarnished, so he will intervene against him. Moreover, in the Murim world, he is called Sohan the Bloody Blade. He will show his sword power to Li Guol while arrogantly sticking out his tongue. Li Guol only smiled while glancing at him. Then, Sohan arrogantly told the soldiers to retreat, because according to him, he was not someone you could fight. Suddenly, someone's voice from behind surprised everyone. 10,000 demons kneel and worship you. Our God once again descends before us. All the soldiers then said it repeatedly while kneeling. At once Li Guol looked up. And there was someone flying with a dark aura around his body. Seeing this, Li Guol felt that he had not felt this kind of feeling for a long time. He wondered if there was anyone in this world who could match his strength. The person then descended slowly. And it turns out he is the demon god, Bianil Guang, the leader of the Blood Demonic Heaven clan. Demon god finally stood in front of Li Guol. All soldiers began to bow their heads and dared not face forward. Demon god immediately said to Li Guol without greeting, and instead asked about a Kadmai Thousand Sword. Li Guol fearlessly explained to him that he had heard that the Blood Demon clan wanted to destroy the Thousand Sword College in order to get the Hollow Thunder heirloom. But the demon god argued that he didn't know anything about it. A soldier then approached the demon god and whispered something to him. And only then did he understand everything. Demon god explained to Li Guol that one of the demonic vessels wanted the Thousand Sword College's Hollow Thunder heirloom, and also wants to avenge the shadow body killer who asked for help from the Blood Demon clan. Hearing that, Li Guol looked at him sharply and immediately released his power aura. Then, he told this demon god to restore the Thousand Sword Academy back to its original state. Blood Demon laughed. He also began to emit aura of darkness power from his body, and he found this very interesting. Li Guo, who did not want to feel threatened, also began to fight back with his energy. And suddenly, an explosion of power occurred between them. A meeting of two people who have reached the absolute level. A clash of energy that ordinary people cannot withstand. The demon god confirmed to him that a god can do whatever he wants, and not act according to the wishes of lowly humans. Li Guo then thought, if he had to prove if his request to free Thousand Sword Academy deserved to be granted. Because that's the only way he can save his students. Because he felt this place was too small, Li Guo jumped to a hill. One of the bald commanders begged His Majesty not to get his hands dirty. But the demon god told him to leave, because this fight was not the place for him. Then the demon god also jumped after Li Guo. Li Guo and demon god finally faced off one-on-one. Seeing the sword used by Li Guo, he asked the truth of the hollow thunder sword. And according to him, it was as rumored, there was a hole in the blade. Well, as Mimon explained in the previous video, Kalu the unbanding is the same shape as the hollow thunder. Because the Li Guo deliberately disguised the identity of the sword. So people who see it will definitely think that the unbanding sword Li Guo is hollow thunder. Even the demon god was fooled. Li Guo immediately got ready with his horse, and saw the sword used by the demon god. He also praised the sword as a good sword. However, the demon god laughed. According to him, this sword was not only good, but the Dark Soul sword was known as the strongest sword under the sky. And how dare Li Guo just call the sword good? Suddenly, a lightning bolt starts to strike Li Guo. Li Guo then invited him to immediately finish this fight. And the demon god agreed. Finally in history, the unbanding or hollow thunder meets the Dark Soul. Two of the four most powerful swords finally clashed. The energy collision on the hill looks very large and powerful. All the blood demon's men were dumbfounded to see it. The light from the energy collision began to shine irregularly, even penetrating the sky. Mu Young, who saw it from afar, couldn't believe what he saw. That there is a man with a sword who can balance against the demon god. Then, Mo Young told his men to protect their respective posts. Then, Mo Young jumped closer to the place of battle between the demon god and Li Guo. Mo Young jumped over the cliffs quickly. He was actually told not to follow the demon god. But his instinct told him that he had to go there. Because this moment is not just an ordinary battle. It could be a history-making battle. Mo Young finally arrived. He hid behind a rock so as not to be affected by the energy of the two of them. Mo Young did not expect and called this impossible, who witnessed the energy clash up close. The amount of energy released from both sides was so great that it was hard to see what they were doing. It seemed that Li Guo dominated the attack and was aggressive in going forward. But the demon god with his dark soul continued to withstand Li Guo's attacks with ease. The rocks around the cliff began to slide. Mu Young had to dodge and move to a safer place. Meanwhile, the fierce battle is still going on. Li Guo was still attacking tirelessly. The unbanding sword continues to shine and emits a powerful lightning aura. Mo Young wondered in his mind, is this a battle between humans? What's more, there is a sword that can fight dark souls. In his opinion, the Thousand Sword School's hollow thunder was no match for the Dark Soul. The demon god slightly retreated and kept his distance. He then gathered all his dark energy. Likewise, Li Guo did not want to be outdone and did not want to relax his lightning energy in the slightest. Once again, rapid movements that cannot even be seen with the naked eye occur. The clash of power between the two of them this time was more devastating than ever. Mu Yang couldn't keep her eyes open. And the rocks around the hill began to slide and fall. And instantly, the two of them faced each other. It seemed that the violent clash was finally over. Mu Young, who could only open her eyes, wondered if anyone won between them, but apparently, whether Demon God or Li Guo, absolutely no one fell. They both continued to look at each other. But suddenly, Demon God put the Dark Soul back into its holster, signaling that this battle must end. Demon God then laughed and flew back to his base. Mu Young, who saw it, also moved quickly to catch up with his master. The one worshipped by 10,000 demons. The awakening of the Sanguinis generation. All the blood demon warriors began to welcome their leader back. The demon god then stood before them while still laughing. He looked very satisfied with the fight. In all his life, he has never met a strong man like Li Guo. Then, the demon god asked the entire blood demon army to be silent. Instantly they all fell silent. The demon god then summoned Mo Jo Hyuk and the Blood Soul. They immediately ran and faced the demon god. They both bowed down asking for forgiveness. But suddenly, while walking away, he told them both to return the Thousand Sword Academy as before. Of course everyone including Mu Young was shocked by what the demon god ordered. But since it was an order, inevitably they had to carry it out. In short, demon god returned to his throne. He just stood there like he was thinking about something. Suddenly, Mu Young came and faced the demon god. Demon god realized that Mo Young was very curious about his decision, but he knew Mo Young didn't dare to ask. Mo Young bowed and didn't dare to ask for an explanation, because for him, demon god's presence here was already clear. Then, demon god got up from his throne. He apologized for betraying Mo Young's trust. Then, he walked past her and explained that he would meditate. And told him to tell the general to hold a demon resurrection celebration. And another thing, the demon god told Mo Young to find out about that person's past. His name is Li Guol. Mu Young obeyed the order and rushed away. Then, the demon god took out his dark soul from his sheath. He prepared to begin meditation. Aura energy began to return to the demon god's body, signaling his feelings that are still not calm. He is still curious who Li Guol really is. Meanwhile, on the hill, seen Li Guol who was still meditating to restore his energy. He also mentioned the name of the demon god, namely Bian Il Guang from the Blood Demonic Heaven clan. According to him, despite the different types of martial arts, I think if people can reach the top, then the essence will be the same. But today, Li Guol realized that his belief was wrong. Blood demon god, Bian Il Guang. His energy was too pure to be called a demon. He felt as if he was fighting the darkness itself. Li Guol then sighed and stood up. He was a little pensive and thought of something. He knew that this was not the end. He managed to put himself in a favorable position. He already felt calm because Bian Il Guang or demon god had promised to restore the Thousand Sword Academy to its original state. It was a promise that demon god even though it didn't come out of his mouth. According to him, this was fate. Because as people who lived under the same sky in generation, once again, Li Guol and Bian Il Guang had fought. Li Guol then jumped up and left, while talking in his heart, that back then he was known as the Great General, the Sword Emperor, and the Elder of the Thousand Sword Academy. He gave up all those titles and wanted to live in peace, but all his efforts were in vain. He wondered, could it be because his willpower was too weak? But he also realized that the greater the power, the greater the responsibility. Moreover, he thought that the Thousand Sword Clan would succeed if he passed on his sword techniques and the Hollow Thunder heirloom. But as it turned out, it was a foolish thought. Because millions of imperial troops and imperial officials are no different, including the Thousand Sword Academy, which is a small clan from the many clans in Murim. If a small clan keeps too much power, they will eventually be attacked by others. Li Guol realized that he had ignored that simple reason. He was now determined, and had to make a decision about what he would do next. Then the scene moved to the Blackstrom cavalry troops who were near the cliff. They can now feel calm, because they managed to escape the pursuit of the Murim Union. This is Jian Chang, captain of the Blackstrom Cavalry Squad 3. It turns out that Jian Chang is still keeping an eye on the movements of the Thousand Sword College that is trying to find protection from the military. Jian Chang then told all of his men to leave their horses Blackstrom on this cliff and they would walk slowly to ambush the group of Thousand Sword College. One No Il, the 20th leader of the College of Thousand Swords, who is also a friend of General Li Guol, was talking to Shurha, one of the most talented and youngest students at the Thousand Sword College. Shurha informed them that the traces of the Manhwa clan and the Southern End clan of the Murim Union had suddenly disappeared. It seemed like they were chasing after the Blackstrom cavalry. The master thought that was good, because then the Blackstrom cavalry wouldn't chase them anymore. Shurha then asked the leader and the others to rest. Meanwhile, Shurha and his dog Sa Rian would stand guard. After they all fell asleep, Shurha and her dog walked to a river not far from where they were resting. She unraveled the ponytail in her hair and then mused. Why did everything come to this, suddenly in a day? The Thousand Sword School is on the verge of collapse. If only teacher Li Guol's brother was here. He would have protected us. Sarian then invited Shurha to play and entertained her. After that, Shurha became even more excited, because now, everyone's life was now his responsibility. And there was no time to talk like a weakling. Suddenly Sarian barked towards the bushes. The suspicious Shir-Ha ran quickly to see how the teacher and his entourage were doing. He saw what looked like a lamp burning behind the bush. And as Shir-Ha slashed at it, he was surprised that someone was waiting for him. As Shir-Ha slashed through the bushes, he saw the flames and someone there, the people who had captured the teacher and the other students. One No-Il, the leader of the academy, shouted, telling Shir-Ha to run. However, Shir-Ha ignored his teacher's words. He didn't want to run and would fight them. He told his teacher to calm down, that he would save them. And as it turns out, the bald man is the shadow body killer, the mastermind behind the riot that occurred and destroyed the Thousand Sword College. Shir-Ha, who was angry, then began to pull out his moves. I don't know what this move is, but it's very cool. Live like a sword drawn into the blue sky, and die like a sword that disappears into eternity. Then, Shir-Ha swung her sword at the shadow body killer and berated him to death. The shadow body killer then jumped and dodged all of Shir-Ha's attacks. At first, the shadow body killer wanted to take Shir-Ha unharmed, but he felt there was no other way. He was already preparing to swing his sword for a counterattack. However, the shadow body killer's sword slash was easily parried by Shir-Ha. And Shir-Ha quickly countered with a twisting sword attack. But the shadow body killer with his agility could still dodge by jumping in the air. However, Shir-Ha's final attack left a sizable gap on one side of his body. The other academy students shouted and warned Shir-Ha to be careful. The shadow body killer, who did not want to miss the opportunity, then moved quickly and intended to slash at Shir-Ha's weak spot. But Shir-Ha was no weakling either. She reorganized her stance and attacked the shadow body killer quickly. Even this time, Shir-Ha's attack broke the shadow body killer's sword. The shadow did not expect it, because when it came to strength, he was certainly stronger. But the shadow could not touch Shir-Ha at all. He was downcast. Shir-Ha went straight to him and mentioned that the fight was not just about strength. Then, Shir-Ha slashed at the shadow body killer until he died instantly. But apparently, the problem didn't end there. Jian Chang from the Blackstrom Cavalry was already standing next to Shir-Ha. Shir-Ha knew that the shadow body killer was allied with the Blood Demon clan. He asked them, why didn't you help him? Jian Chang then explained that he actually didn't want to be associated with that villain. If it weren't for the order, Jian Chang wouldn't be willing to do it. Then, Dian Chang praised him, that Shir-Ha was pretty good for his age, that Shir-Ha was even better than the Manhwa clan and Shoutren clan that he had fought. Jian Chang then introduced who he was and his position in the Blackstrom Cavalry. But of course Shir-Ha and the members of the Thousand Sword School already knew who he was. Here, Shir-Ha had to start being really wary. Because her ancestor, Wu Yongchun, was killed by their snake-tongue spear. One No-Il who saw the arrival of Jian Chang from the Blackstrom Cavalry was of course very surprised, because the weapon carried by Jian Chang, the snake-tongue spear, was very dangerous. If someone gets stabbed by the snake-tongue spear, then his internal organs will explode. And if not dead, at least that person will be paralyzed. Because in history, many Mura martial artists and Thousand Sword Brothers died because of the snake-tongue spear. And even when No-Il's own father, the previous leader of the academy, was killed by that spear. One No-Il immediately drew his sword. He said in his heart that Shir-Ha was the hope of Thousand Sword Academy. So he must save her, even at the cost of his life. One of the students told one No-Il that they should buy a little more time, because the Union of Muram would soon find them. And if that happens, the College of Thousand Swords will definitely be saved. Hearing that, Jian Chang told them not to expect help from the Muram Union because it would only be in vain. Because according to him, the Manhwa clan and Shoutren only pretended to pursue him. But no one in the Muram Union dared to face us directly. Hearing that, of course one No-Il and the others were shocked. So their hopes all this time to wait for help were in vain. However, Jian Chang praised one No-Il who was the leader of the academy. According to him, asking for help to the Muram Union was the right thing to do. Therefore, your decision to rely on and ask for help from the military was actually the right thing to do. Shir-Ha, who saw this, thought that he had no other choice but to fight and protect all his brothers. Shir-Ha then took off his juba. Seeing that, Jian Chang became even more excited to see the true power of the Thousand Sword Academy's best student. Jian Chang then told his men not to interfere with this fight. However, one of Jian Chang's men then came forward and warned his captain. According to him, they should not be here for too long. Apparently, Jian Chang is stubborn. He even accused his men of being afraid if the Muram Union came. Even he also accused that his men did not want his captain to have a hollow thunder sword. He explained to his men that from now on, he would not fight as a Black Storm cavalry captain, but purely as a martial arts expert. Hearing that explanation, Jiayun Chang's men understood and then retreated away. Jiayun Chang began twirling his spear. He then took a stance and prepared to receive Shurha's attack, and told him to unleash all of his Hollow Thunder skills on her. Shurha gladly accepted the challenge. He quickly assumed the attacking position and unleashed all of his energy. Jiayun Chang again underestimated Shurha by saying that she would let Shurha attack first. Shurha started to take the horse, but here she thought, this battle between sword and spear, she was the one at a disadvantage, because the spear had a wider and longer range. In addition, Shurha did not know how fast Jiayun Chang's legs moved. All he had to do now was understand how Jiayun Chang's spear moved. Shurha began to jump and prepared to slash from above. He tried to minimize the distance by making that attack. But just as easily, Jiayun Chang parried Shurha's powerful attack with the shaft of her spear. Shurha was a little surprised that her attack was so easily repelled. She immediately jumped away to avoid being hit by Jiayun Chang's surprise attack. Meanwhile, Jiayun Chang did not seem to panic at all, as if she had predicted the move Shurha was about to make. The other students who saw it also did not expect that Jiayun Chang could parry the sword with the wooden part of her spear even, she did not intend to dodge. One No-Il was also surprised, because Hollow Thunder can even destroy a sword. But Jiayun Chang could withstand it with the wooden part of his spear alone. As for Shurha, he admitted that he had fought some of the best people from different clans in martial arts competitions. Shurha realized that this person was on a different level than them. Jiayun Chang began to intend to strike back. He gathered all the energy in his spear. Jiayun Chang teased Shurha for not being able to cut a log with his Hollow Thunder sword. Now, it was his turn to attack. Jiayun Chang then began to attack. He immediately jumped while releasing his moves. Shurha tried to block Jiayun Chang's attack, slightly pushed back due to the enormous pressure. Feeling that there was no other choice, Shurha chose to avoid the attack. Shurha was almost harmed by the quick attack. But fortunately, she had time to dodge first. Not wanting to waste any time, Shurha intended to strike back. He began to release all of his blue lightning energy. Shurha then attacked with his moves with the intention of pushing Jiayun Chang back. But Jiayun Chang jumped and thrust her spear back at Shurha. Here Shurha panicked a little, because her spear attack increased slightly, her speed increased, which made it quite difficult for Shurha to avoid it. After being able to withstand and dodge several attacks, Shurha, who felt that she had a chance to counterattack, then intended to jump back to maintain her distance first. But she was again surprised to see Jiayun Chang, who still had not relaxed her attacks in the slightest. Apparently, Jiayun Chang realized that Shurha was trying to keep his distance. And according to him, against someone who used a spear, it would be useless. Jiayun Chang charged forward and prepared to attack again. Jiayun Chang's surprise attack was very fast and Shurha could not dodge it easily. Shurha began to really panic and surrender because he was in a really unfortunate position. Suddenly, one No-Il appeared from behind, who was preparing to slash at Jiayun Chang to save Shurha. However, Jiayun Chang did not panic at all. He used the base of his spear to block one No-Il's sword slash. Of course, one No-Il did not expect his attack to be blocked like that. Shurha was worried about her teacher. But one Nil did not back down and tried to attack again. He also asked Shurha to immediately retreat and run for his safety. Jiayun Chang then turned his body around and switched targets to fight one No-Il. She again used the base of her spear and Jiayun Chang's attack hit one No-Il right in the stomach. That sent him flying backwards and crashing into a tree. Shurha then ran and tried to protect his teacher. However, Jiayun Chang held him back, as his fight with Shurha was not yet over. Seeing that Jiayun Chang deliberately attacked her teacher with the tip of her spear, Shurha became curious. Shurha knew that Jiayun Chang had not fought with all his strength. But even so, Shurha was still unable to harm him. Meanwhile, Jiayun Chang himself realized that Shurha was also not fighting with all his strength. Jiayun Chang knew that the Thousand Sword Academy's sword techniques were not ordinary martial arts techniques and required special horses. Then, Jiayun Chang told Shurha to fight with all his might, like a martial arts expert, even though Shurha would die in the end. Shurha was devastated after hearing Jiayun Chang's words. It was true that Shurha had not used the Thousand Sword Academy's sword technique, Shatter Mountain with one sword. Movements that seemed to flow from one to the other. An 8-horse sword technique whose every move had to have subtlety. Shurha, all this time only fought by relying on his physical strength. He had forgotten the original martial arts of the Thousand Sword Academy itself. Feeling reminded, Shurha thanked him. Jian Chang smiled and called his men. He wanted to replace his snake-tongued spear with another black spear. In his opinion, the black spear would be suitable against the hollow thunder sword. Shurha began to release his inner energy. He also prepared to install the 13th stance of the Shatter Mountain with one sword technique. One sword strike became heaven. Instantly, a blue lightning aura began to envelop the hollow thunder. Shurha began to refine his stance, and it appeared that he managed to use the technique perfectly. Even the other students of the Thousand Sword Academy were stunned to see Shurha use the academy's top-level technique. Jian Chang himself was stunned and amazed to see it. Finally, his main goal, to see the true power of Hollow Thunder, had been achieved. Shurha began to move like he was dancing with his sword. Shurha began to attack. Jian Chang was seen preparing to mount a horse with his black spear. Jian Chang began to jump into the air. Black Spear has also released a very scary red fire aura. Shurha also began to advance with his sword dance. Jian Chang could not see Shurha's attack, but he could feel the essence in the steed. He was smiling because he was happy to be able to have such a worthy fight. Jian Chang then attacked him, using the blood spear technique of the Black Strom cavalry that had been perfected long ago. And a few seconds later, a tremendous clash of energy occurred. Very violent. So much so that the surrounding area received a tremendous pressure. Not enough with just one attack, they continued to attack in turn. But it was so fast, no one could see their movements with the naked eye. One Noel couldn't believe that Shurha had successfully used the one sword strike becomes heaven technique. One Noel was amazed at the clash of energy in front of him. A very bright light emanated that made everyone avert their eyes. And a few seconds later, the attack ended, leaving dust flying and blocking the view. Instantly, one Nil continued to call out to Shurha, fearing for her students' safety. But as it turned out, Shurha was still able to stand with her perfect stance. While on the other hand, Jian Chang also did not fall and was still standing with a sturdy steed. The Black Strom cavalry soldiers were shocked, because this was the first time they had seen a blood spear held by someone. Jian Chang now finally knew that this was the true technique of the Thousand Sword Academy. And Shurha nodded slowly. Not long after, a messenger eagle arrived. One of the Black Strom cavalry soldiers approached their captain Jian Chang and then handed him a letter. Apparently, the letter contained a message directly from the blood demon. Jian Chang then read the letter. He was a little surprised but couldn't say a word because it was an order from the demon god. Meanwhile, Shurha raised his sword. He would utilize the technique he just got to attack him, even if he had to die. Jian Chang's men immediately got ready behind Shurha to attack him. But Jian Chang told him to leave it alone. Shurha also stopped his horse. He started to breathe because the move he did earlier was very tiring. Feeling that Shurha's power that he released was finished, Jian Chang immediately said goodbye and he promised that he would continue this battle when he met again later. Of course, the members of the Black Strom cavalry and the Shining Avian Horse clan were a little surprised by Jian Chang's words. Jian Chang then showed the contents of the message that came directly from the Blood Demon clan. But the Shining Avian Horse clan still couldn't accept the order. They have won and there is no way to retreat now. But before finishing his words, Jian Chang then slashed the man until he died instantly. Jian Chang emphasized that this was a divine order and he challenged his other men. If anyone complained, then he himself would finish him off. Of course, none of his men dared to argue and all could only keep their heads down. Jian Chang then invited his men to leave, and they all obeyed and left the people of the Thousand Sword Academy there. Before Jian Chang left, Jian Chang spoke to Shurha through the language of the heart that she once saw a similar sword technique used by Shurha in the Blood Demon clan. After that they left to jump into the sky. Shurha was immediately stunned. One Noel's teacher immediately approached Shurha and asked how he was doing. Shurha also asked back, they both smiled and laughed. Then, one Noel asked if the technique was the one sword become heaven technique. And Shurha said that it was, but Shurha himself couldn't explain it in words. But he really felt the power of that technique. One Noel felt very proud of Shurha. After the founder of the Thousand Sword School passed away, there was no one who could use the 13th steed. And if Shurha had that talent, then she could definitely reach the remaining 5 horses. After that, the Thousand Sword Academy members then walked to return home. On the way, Sherha asked his teacher, "Who do you think it was, the person who sent the message warning of the upcoming Blood Demon Clan attack?" According to him, the short message was very helpful. But apparently, One No Il himself did not know. Sherha asked him again if, according to his teacher, the person who sent the message was the same person who gave the Hollow Thunder sword to them, who was the teacher's kinsman. Hearing that, One No Il shed tears, saying that he misses her and wants to see her again. Sherha also says that he also wants to see her despite the distance. He also asked his teacher to tell him the story when One No Il was with teacher Li Guol. One No Il then told a lot of stories about his friend Li Guol, about his kindness, his martial arts skills, and his accomplishments as a master. And Sherha himself also seemed very enthusiastic about hearing the story. He idolized and wanted to meet General Li Guol. And finally they walked home. After that, it was informed that the Black Storm cavalry that attacked the Thousand Sword Academy returned to the Demonic Heaven clan area on direct orders from the Blood Demon. And the head of the Thousand Sword Academy, One No Il and Sherha, as well as the other Thousand Sword Academy students, managed to survive. 10 days later, Sherha and the group from Thousand Sword Academy appeared to return to Shaanxi. But there seemed to be no welcome from the residents. The citizens were silent because they already knew what happened between the Blood Demon clan and the Thousand Sword Academy. They didn't want to interfere in the matter because they were afraid of being in danger. But the academy members didn't want to take it to heart. For them, just being able to survive was already very lucky for them. And all they could do now was encourage each other to get back on their feet. Sherha talked to his friends to stay strong, because the Thousand Sword Academy was in sight. But suddenly, Sherha's dog Saoryang suddenly barked towards the academy, then he immediately ran towards there. Sherha immediately followed him. Apparently, there was already one of the greatest students of the Thousand Sword College named John Pong. Not only John Pong, he was also there along with other students. John Pong immediately waved to them and approached Sherha. John Pong and Sherha were both grateful that they survived. Then, John Pong and other students saluted the teacher. The teacher immediately asked him about what exactly had happened. With that, John Pong immediately prostrated and apologized. He felt that all this happened because of his negligence. He also asked the teacher to kill him, because he could not protect the vice teachers. One No Il, who heard that, of course, was very surprised. And he also, as a teacher, could not bear to do that. After that, John Pong showed a chest to One No Il. Seen, One No Il immediately knelt down, his body shook violently. John Pong said that the vice teachers have survived until the end. And opened the way for them to survive. Because all of the Blood Demon clan has disappeared since 3 days ago. John Pong and friends returned and found the bodies of the vice teachers. Moreover, the 5 hollow thunder swords belonging to the vice teachers have disappeared. Hearing that, One No Il was even more devastated. He shed tears. Because according to him, losing a brother is bad enough, let alone losing the sword that brother Li Guol loved too. But there is no time to be sad. Because he is the head of Thousand Sword Academy. One No Il got up, and he immediately took out his sword. He orates and shouts that he invites them to revive the Thousand Sword Academy once again. And will not make this happen again. They all become excited instantly. After that, One No Il also invites them to immediately bury them in Xian Mountain, because the deceased has become the Sword of Heaven. As a result of the Blood Demon clan's attack on the Thousand Sword Academy, 5,000 Sword Academy students have become Sword of Heaven deceased. Now, there is only 1 parent and 15 students left in the Thousand Sword Academy. Then, One No Il and the students face the incense. He opens a paper and reveals that as the 20th leader, One No Il worships his predecessors. He mentions that this is not his will. He mentioned that this was not his will, but he sent the 5 students of the academy to him. He hoped that the ancestors can take care of them, as long as they live peacefully as swords in heaven. After that, he burned the paper. Then he explained that birth is symbolized as a sword in the blue sky, and death is symbolized as a sword that is destroyed without a trace. Suddenly, a student ran hurriedly to them. Everyone immediately turned around. He told them that someone had placed the treasure next to the Thousand Swords Academy. Hearing that, the teacher was shocked, and he immediately asked the students to follow him. However, Sherha did not follow him. He planned to stay there, because there were some things he was thinking about. After they all left, Sherha wondered if he could protect the vice teachers if he was a little stronger. Then, he took a book from inside the robe that he placed on the ground. That was one of the 3 books given to him by his brother, teacher Li Guol. which Li Gul gave them 6 years ago along with the Hollow Thunder heirloom. The Shatter Mountains with INE Sword Technique Book, the Cross River with One Step Technique Book, and the Inhale Fog with One Breath Book. The book, Li Gul made with all his heart, so that Thousand Sword Academy could rise again. Shurha hugged the book and he wondered what teacher Li Gul looked like. He had heard that he was about 20 years old when he left Thousand Sword Academy. So according to him, he should be over 70 years old now. Shurha removed the sword from its sheath. He revealed that there were actually many things he wanted to ask him. Because in the end, he had reached the 5th rule of the one sword strike becomes heaven technique. He started practicing his sword. He couldn't be indecisive, because the future of Thousand Sword Academy was in his hands. Then, he remembered the fight with Jian Chang. At that time, Jian Chang told him to show him the Hollow Thunder technique. Because Jian Chang knew that the Thousand Sword Academy's sword technique is not an ordinary martial arts technique and requires a special horse. Then, he also remembered when Jian Chang, before leaving, he said that the Thousand Sword technique that Shurha used, he had seen it in the Blood Demon clan. Shurha was thinking very hard. He wondered what the intention of the man named Jian Chang was, because he didn't just invite a one-on-one duel. He must have been from the beginning. He just wanted to see the one sword strike technique become. But he wondered, why did he wait for that technique? He wondered if there was a power similar to One Strike Becomes Heaven in the Blood Demon clan. However, he himself wasn't too sure about it. But he was sure that something was going on. He was determined to grow stronger. As it turned out, on the hill there was a shadow like a person. And sure enough, there was Li Gul who was looking at Shurha from the top of the hill. Meanwhile, that night, at Hanjin Financial Institution in Shanxi, Li Gul is already there. Manager Manhwa tells Chairman Yeo that there is nothing strange about the tombs of the Thousand Sword Academy's predecessors. But 5 new tombs have been added and 5 Hollow Thunders have been stolen. Also, Chairman Yeo has helped the Thousand Sword Academy by donating money. And the chairman did not identify himself. According to him, it shouldn't be a problem. Li Gul then thanked Manhwa's manager, which of course made the manager nervous. Li Gul explained that he thanked Manhwa's manager because he had met many people and Li Gul felt that Manhwa's manager had an honest gaze. And Li Gul would remember that honesty forever. Seeing Li Gul's speaking style, Manhwa wondered about his attitude. According to her, he looks very young but his attitude and way of speaking, like a 70-year-old martial arts expert. Suddenly, Li Gul tapped him on the shoulder, which of course scared Manhwa. Li Gul explains to him that from today on, whatever Li Gul says, Manhwa has nothing to fear. Then, Li Gul waves his hand, and suddenly a light appears around him. Manhwa, who feels this, does not understand. He thinks this light is like a false comb that devours his entire body, similar to opium. But the piece of this master, he thinks, has no side effects and feels pure. Therefore, if this master speaks that is Li Gul, Manhwa will gladly believe and follow him. After that, Li Gul had one more request for him. That he was looking for 3 people, and Manhwa listened seriously. Not yet had time to dissect what his orders were. The scene moved to the Black Storm cavalry troops who had just arrived at the Demon Blood headquarters. There he was immediately greeted by the 4th captain, because Jian Chang was the 3rd camp. The 4th captain told him that Jian Chang had to finish his report immediately, because there was a place they had to visit. Of course, Jian Chang wondered what the 4th captain meant. Then, the 4th captain explained to him whether the 3rd captain was not curious why the demon god told the Black Storm cavalry to return. Hearing that, Jian Chang was a bit taken aback and became even more curious. As he headed towards a place, he was shocked to see that it was so badly damaged. The 4th captain explained to him that this happened in one day, that a man came here alone and wiped out 1,000 troops with just one swing of the sword. The 12 demonic vessels tried to stop him. But the demonic fierce ghost army's sword was destroyed by that man. And in the end, it was the demon god himself who faced him. After that, he heard that people were trying to figure out his martial arts power by taking back the scattered pieces of the demonic fierce ghost army. But the ridiculous thing is, even though they put back the parts, the sword was out of shape. The edge of the sword melted as if it had been struck by lightning. After telling everything, Jian Chang faced the wall and the 4th captain asked permission to leave. And shortly thereafter, there are his men who ran up to Jian Chang. He gave him a paper containing the information that Jian Chang had previously requested. After that, Jian Chang opened the paper and informed that the sword technique that the 10th leader of the Shining Avian Horse clan had discovered 300 years ago. It was a high-level sword technique consisting of 18 horses and competed for the top as part of the 5 greatest sword techniques. The next Shining Avian Horse Clan leader, Hyuk-woo Lin, successfully used the Flying Heaven's Bloody Sword technique, and the current Shining Avian Horse Clan leader died while doing so. Finally, Hyuk-woo Lin succeeded in becoming the clan leader. Meanwhile, in the Empire, there is a great general who is the leader of 1,000,000 troops named GMSA-do. He also explained to his subordinates about the incident of the Blood Demon clan attacking the Thousand Sword Academy. According to him, because the Murin Union emphasized that this matter was not too special, the imperial troops would not interfere. And because his subordinates did not find any traces, he told the 2 of them to leave. Suddenly, someone appears who takes GMSA-do by surprise. It's the head of the Secret Service, Major General Yeo Bum-suk. General Yeo pulls up a chair and talks one-on-one with General GMSA-do. He tells her that it's been a long time since they served General Lee Gwul back in the day. And now he's got word that the general just passed through the human gate and accidentally revealed his identity to the general there. There's no word if he'll return to the Imperial Palace or not. One thing is for sure, General Yeo is pretty sure that the situation is bad enough that he had to reveal his identity even while hiding. And General Lee Gwul is the clan of the Thousand Sword Academy that was destroyed by the Blood Demon clan. GMSA-do just discussed the matter of the destruction about whether they should mobilize the military or not. If so, since General Lee Gwul is an imperial official, GMSA-do asks, who would dare to disturb him? Hearing that, General Yeo calls him stupid and brainless after becoming a general. Because according to him, judging from General Lee Gwul's nature, he would never call himself an imperial official. Then, there's one more thing General Yeo wants to tell him. That is, General Lee Gwul regained his young body with rejuvenation. Hearing that, General GMSA-do is shocked. Then, the scene moved to the 2 soldiers who were peeing behind the fort. These 2 seemed to be drunk and babbling incoherently. Until, they blurted out mentioning, they did not expect that the great General Lee Gwul had passed through the human gate. And suddenly, there was someone with a large body and approached them and immediately killed them after getting information about Lee Gwul. It turns out, it was the Sib attack of the Blood Demon clan. Meanwhile, in a bar in Shanxi, there are several old men playing gambling. Not Zeus Lightning or Insa's yes. When there is an old man who managed to win the gambling and he wanted to go home when he got the profit. Suddenly, the man next to him got up and took his hand, then broke the old man's hand and threatened him with a sword. The big man did not accept being defeated and called the old man a dirty trick. The old man also looked around for help, but the other man pretended not to see him. Until he saw the young man who was Lee Gwul. He called out to Lee Gwul, but Lee Gwul also turned his face away, of course. That made the old man furious. And the video continued.